In the vast expanse of Edwards Air Force Base, the roar of jet engines mingled with tense whispers from the VIP section. I sat in the 12th row, my navy blue Air Force uniform clinging to my body like armor, the pressed fabric the only thing keeping me from falling apart. The auditorium at Edwards Test Center was massive and solemn, steeped in an atmosphere of gravity that made a person feel small. Row upon row of officers adorned with ribbons filled the seats, a sea of navy blue and gleaming gold. But for me, the air here wasn't solemn at all. It was thick and heavy, saturated with suffocating pressure that signaled an approaching storm. From my seat, I could see them in the VIP area. My father, retired General Robert Iron Hawk Mitchell, a living legend carved from granite and discipline. Beside him, my brother, Colonel David Mitchell, the Golden Child, Air Force Academy graduate, destined to follow in our father's magnificent footsteps. They were the stars of the Mitchell family constellation, blazing bright and burning hot. I was just a dim satellite caught in their orbit by the inescapable gravitational pull of the family name. My father hadn't looked at me once. He didn't need to. I could feel his presence like a physical weight on my shoulders, a silent and constant judgment. He was here as the guest of honor, testament to the Air Force's glorious past. David was here as the promising future. And I, Captain Mitchell, was here as a mandatory accessory, the final, slightly disappointing piece necessary to complete the picture of a perfect military family. Just breathe, I told myself, my gloved hands clenched tight on my thighs. Just get through this ceremony in silence. Become invisible. It was the mantra I'd perfected over a lifetime. The ceremony dragged on. Medals were presented, speeches delivered. I focused on a loose thread on the chair in front of me, anything to anchor myself. Then the master of ceremonies, a colonel with a polished voice, stepped to the podium. "And now," he began, his voice echoing lightly, "we want to honor an officer whose unique contributions, though often silent, have had a resounding impact. For exceptional drone piloting skills that have repeatedly saved American soldiers' lives in dangerous situations. I felt it before I saw it. A subtle shift in the atmosphere throughout the auditorium. I saw my father's shoulders stiffen. His perpetually straight back became a solid iron plate, and then the unthinkable happened. He stood up, not to applaud, not to leave. He stood with the sudden, commanding motion of a man who owned every room he entered. He stepped into the aisle, raising his hand, not to wave, but as a command to stop. The colonel's voice trembled, then cut off entirely. A wave of silence spread across the vast auditorium. Thousands of conversations and coughs died in an instant. My father's voice, that battlefield roar that once commanded battalions, echoed through the auditorium's modern sound system. "I have to say this," he bellowed, his gaze sweeping across rows of stunned faces. He wasn't speaking to the master of ceremonies. He was addressing the entire United States Air Force. Drone piloting, sitting in an air-conditioned room pushing buttons, is completely useless. A collective gasp was sucked from the air. My blood froze. "The Air Force needs warriors," he shouted, pointing his finger in the air for emphasis. "People who can fly real planes, not weaklings who just play games." Every head in that room turned. First they looked from my father, the symbol of military might, to the bewildered colonel on stage. Then their eyes began sweeping the crowd, thousands of pairs searching, curious, and then, like magnets drawn to iron, they all found me. The only officer in the room who fit that description. The general's daughter. The gamer. My brother David, standing loyally beside our father, didn't intervene. He didn't look embarrassed. He simply watched the spectacle unfold, a smug, victorious smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. It was the face of complete triumph. My world didn't just crack, it shattered into atoms. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, blocking out the shocked whispers that had begun to explode. A wave of hot, brilliant shame washed over my face, my neck, my entire body. I was naked, flayed alive before colleagues, superiors, subordinates, and my own family held the knife. But just as the humiliation threatened to swallow me whole, another voice cut through the chaos. It was sharp, clear, and radiated an authority that didn't need to shout. General Mitchell. General Hayes, the 4-star commander of Space and Missile Systems Command, had risen from his front row seat and was moving toward the stage. He was a quiet, formidable man, his reputation built on intellect, not volume. He looked at my father with diamond-hard eyes. Then his eyes found me across the room. "Bring Captain Mitchell up here," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "We need the Reaper." The silence that fell this time was different. It was heavier, deeper, laced with profound and sudden respect. "Reaper," I heard someone whisper from the rows behind. "The Grim Reaper." My legs felt like lead. My body, in some distant autopilot state, began to move. I stood up. I put one foot in front of the other. And then a miracle happened. As I began the long walk down the aisle, a single officer in the 3rd row stood, coming to attention. Then another and another. In a silent, rolling wave, the entire room rose. Lieutenants, captains, colonels, even other generals in the VIP section, all standing in silent, respectful salute. They weren't standing for my father. They were standing for me. I kept walking, my eyes locked on General Hayes. I walked straight past my brother, his smug smile now frozen on his face, a horrific mask of disbelief. Then I walked past my father. He still stood in the aisle, his body rigid, his face white as a ghost. For the first time in my life, I saw not anger, not disappointment, but pure, undiluted shock in his eyes. I didn't look away. I let that image burn into my memory as I walked toward the stage, toward the man who called me Reaper, leaving the wreckage of my family behind. The storm had finally broken. The image of my father's face, ashen, defeated, stripped of his usual authority, should have been a victory. But standing on that stage, the respectful silence of the auditorium ringing in my ears, I didn't feel triumphant. Instead, his shocked expression became a key, unlocking a door to memories I'd kept sealed shut for years. The polished floors of Edwards disappeared, and suddenly I was 16 again, standing on the cold linoleum of our small house at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It was May. Our home, a standard-issue wooden duplex assigned to military families, was filled with the warm, comforting sense of American tradition. The sweet aroma of my mother's apple pie cooling on the counter. The air should have been warm, filled with laughter. But in the Mitchell household, warmth was a rationed commodity. The air was cold, thin, and brittle with unspoken rules. All day I'd been clutching a secret, a thick cream-colored envelope that felt like a ticket to another universe. It was an acceptance letter from MIT, offering a full scholarship to their aeronautical engineering program. It wasn't just acceptance, it was an escape route. It was my dream printed in elegant navy blue ink. I'd held it against my chest, heart pounding with anxious, hopeful energy, waiting for the perfect moment to share my triumph, to finally earn a fraction of the approval that was poured over my brother so easily. That evening, our dining table was crowded with extended family, aunts and uncles in their Sunday best, all orbiting the gravitational center of our family, my father. He sat at the head of the table, a king presiding over his court, and beside him was the crown prince, my brother David, home on leave from his first year at the Air Force Academy. He was the sun, and every conversation was a planet revolving around him. Endless stories about his rigorous training, the respect he earned from peers, praise from superior officers. He soaked it all up with the practiced, humble confidence I knew was anything but humble. I sat silent, picking at my food, feeling my own light dim until I was just a shadow at my own family's dinner table. I was invisible. Finally, when the dessert plates were being passed, I saw my chance. My hands trembled as I pulled the envelope from my dress pocket. My voice was small, barely a whisper. "Dad, I have this." I slid the letter across the polished wood of the table. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the prestigious MIT logo without a hint of interest. Then he set it down, not in an empty space, but next to the leftover chicken scraps, a place reserved for discarded bones and crumpled napkins. He didn't even open it. He looked at me, his gaze flat, cold, and unimpressed. Then his eyes shifted to David, and familiar pride softened his features. He raised his voice, ensuring everyone at the table could hear his verdict. Aeronautical engineering scholarship. He said the words like they were the diagnosis of a disappointing disease. "Designing airplanes, Sarah, look at your brother." He pointed toward David with his fork. "He's learning to fly real planes, command squadrons. That's the future. That's power. What would you do with engineering blueprints? Sit at a drafting table while your brother's protecting the country in the skies." The conversation around the table died. A thick, uncomfortable silence fell. I could feel my cheeks burning with heat so intense it brought tears. It felt like thousands of tiny needles were piercing my skin as I sensed the pitying glances from my aunts and uncles. They looked away, suddenly fascinated by their empty plates. Across the table, David just shrugged, a perfect performance of indifference. But I saw it, a flash of cruel satisfaction in his eyes. He'd won again. The final killing blow came with dessert. My father stood up, raising his wine glass. "Everyone," he announced, his voice once again booming with pride. "Let's raise our glasses to toast Cadet David Mitchell, future pilot and the pride of the Mitchell family." "Congratulations," David echoed throughout the room. Glasses clinked in cheerful sounds, ringing out praise for my brother's glory. No one mentioned my name. No one glanced my way. My achievement, my dream, was left to die on the table. The letter, the most important piece of paper in my young life, lay forgotten. A cranberry sauce stain clung to the corner of the envelope like a wound. That night I cried in my room. Silent, choking sobs of someone who finally understood their place in this world. I clutched the only thing that felt like a shield. A thick book on aeronautical engineering and robotics my mother had given me before she passed away. She was an aeronautical engineer, a lover of machines and skies, a gentle soul in a house built of military steel. She was the one who planted the love of flight in me, who taught me that airplanes had souls, that understanding how they flew was understanding freedom. She used to tell me, "Sarah, your engineer's mind is a weapon. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." But sitting there, tears soaking the thin pages of her gift, I realized that in this house, under this roof, my weapon was just a burden. It didn't make me strong. It made me a target. It didn't make me valuable. It made me a disappointment. And a question, cold and sharp, cut through my grief. Why? Why did I keep fighting for approval from a man who would never grant it? Why did I keep trying to win a game that was rigged from the start? That question, born from a 16-year-old girl's tears, became the driving force of a new life. Why play a rigged game? The answer was simple. You don't play. You leave the table and build your own. After graduating MIT with honors, I didn't go home. I went straight into the Air Force, choosing the drone operations training program, a path I knew my father secretly despised. "Drones are for those who don't dare fly for real," he'd once said. It was my own quiet rebellion. My first duty station was Creech Air Force Base, Nevada. The desert there was a special kind of brutal. It wasn't just sand and sun. It was complete isolation from the skies I loved. Instead of a cockpit, I had a shipping container bathed in fluorescent light. Instead of the sensation of flight, I had screens and joysticks. But even that deep disappointment couldn't compare to the cold reception I received from my colleagues. I was the only female drone pilot in the unit and the only one with an engineering degree instead of pure military training. I was an anomaly, and they never let me forget it. They called me MIT, a nickname dripping with sarcasm, or even worse, nerd bird. In daily briefings, I would try to offer analysis on how aerodynamics or flight patterns might impact missions, only to meet dismissive shrugs or complete interruption. My commanding officer, an old-school colonel who believed brute force solved every problem, once told me straight out, "Mitchell, I need pilots who can destroy targets, not ones who can diagram wind patterns." My missions reflected their opinion of my skills. I was pushed into the most tedious assignments, mostly surveillance runs, work everyone believed autopilot could do better. I was isolated, my expertise treated not as an asset but as a quirky, useless hobby. Loneliness was a physical presence, a constant companion in the gray, frozen landscape. But I refused to break. The girl who had cried over a stained envelope was gone. In her place was a woman forged in silent fire. I didn't complain. I worked. I showed up earlier than everyone and stayed later. I spent hours in flight simulators, not just practicing basic maneuvers, but studying advanced aerodynamics, weather patterns, terrain analysis. I used my own money to buy books on tactical aviation and unmanned system psychology, building a library they would never read. I created my own system, a unique matrix combining engineering principles, atmospheric physics, and battlefield psychology to optimize drone performance. It was a weapon no one else had, and I honed it in silence. At night, alone in my sterile dormitory room, desert winds howling outside the window, I found comfort in a different kind of inspiration. I read about pioneering female pilots like Amelia Earhart and Jackie Cochran. Their words were medicine for the day's small cuts. Earhart saying, "The most difficult thing is the decision to act. The rest is merely tenacity," became my silent creed. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me down with doubt. You may ground me with hatred. But still, like air, I'll rise. I didn't need their recognition. I just needed to prove them wrong. My chance came in the form of a crisis mission. A military convoy was ambushed in treacherous mountain terrain in Afghanistan, and all attempts at rescue with manned aircraft had failed due to weather conditions and enemy fire. The terrain was too dangerous, visibility zero, and traditional rescue ops couldn't penetrate hostile airspace. After hours of getting nowhere, they were forced to turn to me as a last resort. The problem? Multiple drone coordination in severe weather with zero visibility, navigating mountain terrain to extract wounded soldiers. I didn't use standard protocols. I didn't follow established flight patterns. I simply sat down and began to read the sky. I didn't rely solely on GPS. I studied wind patterns, analyzed thermal currents, calculated how mountain ridges would affect airflow. I saw vulnerabilities in the weather system, not technical vulnerabilities, but atmospheric weaknesses. The enemy had positioned themselves based on traditional flight paths, but forgot about unconventional approach vectors. 6 hours later, controlling a swarm of drones like fingers of my own hands, I had successfully extracted the entire convoy. No casualties. Textbook precision in impossible conditions. When I stepped out of the operations center holding the mission completion report, the entire command post fell silent. The constant chatter of radios and typing stopped. My colonel, the man who wanted target destroyers, looked up at me from the command desk. He said nothing, but for the first time the dismissive smirk was gone. In its place was a look of grudging respect. It wasn't a medal. It wasn't a public commendation, but it was my first victory, a small, quiet triumph on a long and lonely road. From that day on, they called me Reaper. Death from above, but I preferred to think of it as rebirth from below. a phoenix rising from the ashes of doubt. The quiet victory at Creech had opened a door I never knew existed. My success with the convoy rescue meant that my methods, once dismissed as eccentric, were now the subject of official interest. I was summoned to a high-level briefing with Special Operations Command to report on my drone coordination procedures. The conference room at Nellis Air Force Base was a completely different world. Gone was the rough, practical reality of Creech, replaced by the steady hum of air conditioning and sophisticated flight simulation equipment. The air was cold, smelling of jet fuel and precision-grade electronics. It was filled with aviation experts, men and women who lived in the world of aerodynamics, flight systems, and tactical air operations. With my engineering background and unconventional approach, I felt like an artist in a room full of test pilots, a theorist in a hangar full of practitioners. I delivered my presentation, voice steady as I walked them through the methodology, multi-drone coordination, real-time weather analysis, terrain-adaptive flight patterns. When I finished, the reaction was a wave of polite, professional nods. They understood the outcome, the what, but the process, the how, remained a foreign abstraction. They saw the successful rescue but didn't see the artistry behind it. As the room began to empty, the soft shuffling of chairs and murmured conversations filling the space, one person stayed behind. It was a warrant officer with a calm, steady presence that stood out amid the high energy of the room. He waited patiently, not checking his phone or packing his briefcase, just waited until we were the only two left. "Captain Mitchell," he began, his voice calm and deep, a stark contrast to the boisterous tones I was used to. "I work closely with Luis Santos Viper. He's stationed in Germany, but consults here." He didn't offer a handshake, just a small, respectful nod. He wasn't looking at the results on my final slide. He was looking directly at me. "I have a question about your process. You mentioned identifying the enemy's primary weakness based on atmospheric pressure differentials when discussing the mountain rescue. That's not in any field manual. That's art." I was stunned into silence. For years, my work had been judged solely on the product, successful mission, piece of intel. It was a binary world of success or failure. But this man, this stranger, wasn't just seeing what I did. He was understanding how I did it. He saw the craft, the delicate, intuitive dance behind the science. For the first time, I felt not just successful, but truly seen. "Thank you, warrant officer," I managed, my voice slightly shaky. "Viper," he corrected gently. "Do you have time for coffee, Captain? I want to hear more about your art." We ended up at a small off-base diner, the kind of place with worn red vinyl booths, the faint scent of bacon in the air, and a waitress who called everyone honey. Over mugs of steaming black coffee, we talked for hours. It was effortless. Conversation flowed like water. I found myself telling him things I hadn't spoken about for years, about my mother's old aviation books, about how she taught me that every aircraft was a unique extension of the pilot's soul, that understanding flight patterns was understanding freedom itself. He in turn spoke about the beauty he found in his own world. He described the elegance of a perfectly maintained drone, comparing it to a symphony orchestra, where every component had a purpose, nothing wasted. He explained how he could identify an individual UAV's personality just by listening to engine harmonics, the unique vibration signature that each aircraft left behind. "A drone maintained properly flies like poetry," he explained, his eyes lighting with passion. "One neglected will fight the pilot on every command. One tuned perfectly responds like an extension of your thoughts. It's all there in the telemetry streams. You just need to know how to listen." "Our worlds are more similar than I thought, Viper," I said, a small, genuine smile forming on my face. "You understand machines. I command them through the sky. Both of us are just looking for the truth hidden beneath the surface." In that moment, a connection sparked, a sense of kinship I'd never felt with my own brother. With Viper, I wasn't the odd dictionary girl. I wasn't a disappointment. I was a respected peer, an expert in my field, and he was the first person to make me feel that way. A few days later, an email from him appeared in my inbox. No long message, just a single link to a documentary about Chuck Yeager and the test pilots. Below the link, he typed one short sentence. "Courage isn't about not feeling afraid. Courage is about feeling afraid and stepping into the cockpit anyway." He saw it all. He saw the resilient armor I wore every day, but he also saw the fear I hid beneath. He understood the silent, exhausting battle I fought with perfectionism and imposter syndrome. That Saturday, I was buried under maintenance reports in my office, fluorescent lights humming into the late hours, casting a sterile glow over piles of technical manuals. Loneliness in those moments was a palpable thing, a weight in the quiet room. Around 9 p.m., the door opened. It was Viper holding a large pepperoni pizza box and a cold can of Mountain Dew. "Thought you might need this," was all he said. He didn't offer advice or try to fix my problems. He simply pulled up a chair, opened his own laptop with flight simulation software, and sat with me in the quiet hum of the office, a silent partner in the late-night grind. His presence was a profound statement that spoke louder than any words. "You're not alone in this." That's when I truly understood. Family isn't always about the blood you share. Sometimes it's about the people who show up when you're working late. It's the person who sees your dedication and doesn't think you're crazy. It's the person who brings you pizza on a lonely Saturday night and helps you fine-tune flight parameters one setting at a time. Have you ever felt that? A moment of grace when a colleague, a friend, shows you more understanding and respect than you've ever known from your own family. That was Viper. He was the first teammate I could completely count on, the foundation for a professional partnership I never knew I needed. In the months that followed, as the missions Viper and I collaborated on became increasingly complex, our bond only deepened. We developed a kind of shorthand communication. We could coordinate drone swarms with minimal radio chatter. I knew when he needed extra time for pre-flight diagnostics just by watching his posture. He could predict the tactical adjustments I was about to make based on how I positioned UAV formations. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared pursuit of excellence. And for the first time in my career, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. Professional recognition followed. Our drone operations became the model for Special Operations Command. I was promoted and transferred to more challenging assignments. But most importantly, I found something I didn't know I was missing. I found a wingman. The years after my time at Creech were a blur of steady progress. My friendship with Viper became an anchor. We were stationed on different continents half the time, but the bond forged over coffee and aircraft telemetry only deepened. Professionally, my reputation grew. I was no longer the dictionary girl, but a respected specialist. My work eventually took me to Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar, a sprawling American base set amid endless golden sand dunes. I was mediating a series of delicate tactical operations between coalition forces, a job requiring every ounce of my skill and focus. It was demanding, fulfilling work. I'd built a life for myself, a world away from the shadow of my family. The quiet victory at Creech had opened a door I never knew existed. My success with the convoy rescue meant that my methods, once dismissed as eccentric, were now the subject of official interest. I was summoned to a high-level briefing with European Air Operations Command to report on my drone swarm coordination procedures. The flight to Ramstein Air Base, Germany, felt like stepping into a completely different world. Gone was the arid Nevada desert, replaced by the lush green hills of the Rhineland-Palatinate. This sprawling base was the hub of American air operations in Europe, where experts from across the NATO alliance gathered to share tactics and technology. The conference room at European Command Center was a world of precision and efficiency. The crisp air carried the scent of strong German coffee and the soft hum of modern electronics. It was filled with aviation experts, men and women who lived in the world of air tactics, radar, and smart weapons systems. With my focus on drones and automated coordination, I felt like a musician in a room full of engineers, an artist in a technical building. I delivered my presentation, voice steady as I walked them through my methodology: multi-UAV coordination, real-time terrain analysis, target profiling based on movement patterns. When I finished, the reaction was a wave of polite, professional nods. They understood the outcome, the what, but the process, the how, remained a foreign abstraction. They saw the data points but didn't see the artistry behind them. As the room began to empty, the soft shuffling of chairs and whispered conversations filling the space, one person stayed behind. It was a technical sergeant with a calm, steady presence that stood out amid the high energy of the room. He waited patiently, not checking his phone or packing equipment, just waited until we were the only two left. "Captain Mitchell," he began, his voice carrying a slight Latino accent, warm but professional. "Luis Santos, but everyone calls me Viper." He didn't offer a handshake, just a small, respectful nod. He wasn't looking at the results on my final slide. He was looking directly at me. "I have a question about your process. You mentioned identifying the target's primary vulnerability based on elevation pattern changes while coordinating 6 UAVs simultaneously. That's not in any manual. That's art." I was stunned into silence. For years, my work had been judged solely on its product: a successful rescue, a target eliminated. It was a binary world of success or failure. But this man, this stranger, wasn't just seeing what I had done. He understood how I had done it. He saw the craft, the delicate, intuitive dance behind the science. For the first time, I felt not just successful, but truly seen. "Thank you, Sergeant," I said, my voice slightly shaky. "Are you a drone maintenance specialist?" "Viper," he corrected gently. "And not just maintenance. I'm a tactical coordinator. I make sure the birds fly right and hit the right targets." He paused, then added with a small smile, "Do you have time for coffee, Captain? I want to hear more about your art." We ended up at a small gasthaus off base, the kind of place with old oak tables, the smell of schnitzel and beer in the air, and a proprietress who called everyone Liebling. Over mugs of strong German coffee, we talked for hours. It was effortless. Conversation flowed like water. I found myself telling him things I hadn't spoken about for years, about my mother's old technical books, about how she taught me that every aircraft was an extension of its pilot, that understanding machines was understanding yourself. In turn, he spoke about the beauty he found in his own world. He described the elegance of a perfectly maintained drone system, comparing it to an orchestra where every component had a role, nothing wasted. He explained how he could identify each UAV's personality just by listening to engine sounds, the unique vibration pattern each aircraft left behind. "A well-maintained drone flies like poetry," he explained, his eyes lighting with passion. "One that's neglected will fight the pilot on every command. One tuned perfectly will respond like an extension of your thoughts. It's all there in the data streams. You just need to know how to listen." Our worlds are more similar than I thought, Viper, I said, a small, genuine smile forming on my face. You understand machines, I command them. Both of us are finding ways to make impossible missions possible. In that moment, a connection sparked, a sense of partnership I'd never felt before. With Viper, I wasn't the oddball geek girl. I wasn't a disappointment. I was the other half of a perfect team, and he was the first person to make me feel that way. A few days later, an email from him appeared in my inbox. No long message, just a single link to an article about fighter pilot psychology and one line below. The best pilots aren't the ones who never crash. They are the ones who know how to get back up. He saw it all. He saw the professional armor I wore every day, but he also saw the doubts I hid beneath. He understood the silent battle I fought with perfectionism and fear of failure. That weekend, I was working overtime in the maintenance hangar bay, bright halogen lights casting long shadows on the concrete floor. I was troubleshooting a software glitch on a Predator drone, completely focused on the diagnostic screens. Around 8 p.m., the hangar door opened. It was Viper holding 2 cups of coffee from the base exchange and a bag of German pretzels. "Thought you might need fuel," was all he said. He didn't offer advice or try to take over my work. He simply pulled up a stool, opened his own toolkit, and began doing routine maintenance checks on the UAV next to mine, a silent partner in the late-night grind. We worked in comfortable silence, only the soft whir of cooling fans and the occasional click of tools. Sometimes he would point out a detail I'd missed, or I would ask him about a component specification. It was perfect collaboration, 2 experts working in sync. His presence was a profound statement that spoke louder than any words. You're not alone in this. That's when I truly understood. Partnership isn't always about romance or blood family. Sometimes it's about finding someone who understands your craft, who appreciates the precision you bring to the work. It's the person who shows up when you're working late and helps you get the job done, not because they have to, but because they respect what you're trying to accomplish. Have you ever felt that? A moment of connection when a colleague, a partner, truly sees your skill and dedication. That was Viper. He was the first teammate I could completely count on, the foundation for a professional relationship I never knew I needed. In the months that followed, as the missions Viper and I collaborated on became more complex, our bond only deepened. We developed a kind of shorthand. We could coordinate drone operations with minimal radio chatter. I knew when he needed extra time for pre-flight checks just by watching his posture. He could predict the tactical adjustments I was about to make based on how I positioned the UAVs. It was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared excellence. And for the first time in my career, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. Professional recognition followed. Our drone operations became the model for the European theater. I was promoted and transferred to more challenging assignments. But most importantly, I had found something I didn't know I was searching for. I had found my wingman. The years after my time at Ramstein were a smooth blur of professional progress. My partnership with Viper had become legend within the drone community. We were deployed on different continents half the time, but the bond forged in that German hangar only deepened through distance and time. Professionally, my reputation grew beyond expectations. I was no longer the isolated geek girl, but a respected drone operations specialist across NATO. My work with autonomous swarm tactics had revolutionized how the military approached multi-target scenarios. My final assignment brought me to Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar, one of America's most critical bases in the Middle East. The sprawling facility was set amid the endless sand dunes of the Arabian Peninsula, a technological oasis in the ancient desert. I was leading drone operations security for Operation Desert Shield Roman II, a major campaign aimed at eliminating remaining ISIS cells in Iraq and Syria. It was demanding, high-stakes work. The enemies had adapted, using sophisticated electronic warfare tactics to counter drone operations. My job was to ensure communications security and maintain operational superiority in the digital domain. The command center at Al-Udeid was like the nerve center of the entire operation. Dozens of large screens displayed real-time battlefield intelligence, satellite feeds, and drone telemetry. Air conditioning hummed constantly to combat the desert heat, creating an artificial climate in the concrete bunker. The scent of strong coffee and ozone from electronic equipment had become as familiar as home. I spent 18 hours each day monitoring networks, coordinating with intelligence teams, and ensuring that communication systems weren't compromised. The stress level was high, but I thrived under pressure. This was the kind of work I'd trained for my entire career. Then one evening in early December, as the first holiday decorations began to appear around the base, small attempts to bring the comfort of home to this desert outpost, my satellite phone rang. The caller ID flashed a number I hadn't seen for years. General Robert Mitchell. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. He had never, not once, called me while deployed. A stupid, stubborn flicker of hope ignited in my chest, hope I thought I had extinguished long ago. Maybe he heard about my work here, the thought whispered. Maybe he's proud. Maybe after all this time he wants to apologize. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Sarah." His voice was the same baritone of pure, undiluted authority that instantly transported me back to childhood. "Your brother and I are here. We have something important to discuss with you." Then another voice, slick and smooth, oozing synthetic warmth that made my skin crawl. "Hey, little sister," David said. "Heard you're doing big things out there." I almost believed them. For a moment, I let hope burn brighter. My hope was a candle, and they snuffed it out with a single breath. My father dispensed with pleasantries immediately. "You're working with a private military contractor out there, Phoenix Defense Solutions, correct?" "Yes," I answered cautiously. "They provide some of our drone maintenance and logistical support." "Good," he said. "I have a solid relationship with their CEO, Goodman. Seems there's a GAO investigation coming down the pipeline. Some allegations about their security protocols not meeting standards." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. I knew where this was going. "I need you to influence the report, Sarah," he continued, his tone matter-of-fact as if he were asking me to pass the salt. "Just soften it up. Omit a few of the more damaging technical details. Emphasize the positive operational record. Consider it a favor for the family." I was speechless. The audacity of it stole the air from my lungs. He wasn't just asking me to lie. He was asking me to commit a felony, to betray my oath, my unit, and the very core of my duty as an officer, all to protect one of his business connections. "Dad," I stammered, my voice barely audible. That's illegal. It's a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's an ethical breach." The warmth, fake as it was, vanished from his voice, replaced by familiar, chilling cold. "Don't you dare lecture me about ethics, Sarah," he snapped. "I served this country for 40 years. You're just a captain. This is how the world works. You help us, we help you. Don't forget who gave you that name on your uniform." It was a threat wrapped in the guise of a reminder. Then David chimed in, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "That's right, Sarah. Don't be naive. This is your chance to finally prove you can be useful to this family, a real team player." And there it was, the truth stripped bare. In their eyes, I wasn't an officer. I wasn't a specialist with a valuable skill set. I was a tool, a pawn on their chessboard to be moved and sacrificed for their own gain. Years of work, small victories, the life I had painstakingly built for myself, it all meant nothing to them. I was still just the disappointing daughter, finally being offered a chance to be useful. A surge of anger, hot and pure, rose within me. It wasn't the helpless rage of youth. It was the clear, focused fury of a woman who finally knew her own worth. The lessons from Viper, the strength I'd found in my own solitude, the self-respect I had fought so hard to earn, all of it coalesced into a single, unshakable wall of resolve. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting them feel the weight of my decision. Then I spoke one sentence, my voice low, clear, and steady. I will not. Before either of them could respond, I ended the call. My hand trembled as I set the phone down. But inside, in the core of my being, something had settled. A line had been drawn. A door had been slammed shut, and this time I was the one who turned the key. The line went dead, but the silence that followed was louder than any argument. I had defied him. For the first time in my life, I had not bent, not broken, not tried to appease him. I had simply said no. The finality of it hung in the cold Qatari air. I knew there would be consequences. I just didn't know they would come so soon or be so brutal. 3 days later, I was leading a final cybersecurity sweep for a major offensive. We were in a mobile command center on the outskirts of a small village, a drab concrete building chosen for its anonymity. Tension in the room was thick enough to taste. My team and I were on high alert. The communication system provided by Phoenix Defense Solutions had been glitchy all morning, crackling with static. I had reported the technical difficulties, but field repairs were ongoing. Suddenly, a voice cut through the static in my earpiece. It wasn't one of my men. It was a strange voice speaking Arabic with a chillingly calm demeanor. But the words weren't about the mission. They were for me. "Reaper," the voice whispered. "Death from above, is your father disappointed in you?" Ice flooded my veins. It wasn't just my code name, Reaper, a name known only by a select few. It was the question, a surgical strike into the deepest, most private wound of my soul. A vulnerability known only to my family. It was a psychological blow, a message sent with cruel precision. Before I could even process the violation, the world exploded. Screens in the command center suddenly filled with cascading errors. Network infrastructure crashed simultaneously. All drone feeds went dark. Communication with field units was severed. "We're being hacked," a technician shouted. "Someone's inside our systems." I sprang into action, fingers flying over the keyboard trying to trace the intrusion. But the attack was sophisticated, multi-layered. Whoever was doing this knew our systems inside and out. "Malware deployment detected," another analyst called out. "They're targeting our operational databases." Through the chaos, a horrifying clarity pierced through my fear. This wasn't a random cyber attack by a disgruntled faction. This was a professional hit. They knew our exact vulnerabilities. They knew our protocols. They even knew my deepest psychological weakness. Someone had given them everything. Someone had sold us out. And in my heart, I knew who. The cyber attack felt like an eternity. When backup systems finally restored minimal functionality, all I could think about were two images. The cold, commanding face of my father and the smug, triumphant smirk of my brother. This was their answer to my defiance. They hadn't just disowned me. They had tried to erase me. Back at Al Udeid, technical teams worked frantically to assess the damage. The physical infrastructure was intact, but the digital compromise was extensive. Mission data corrupted, operational plans leaked, communication protocols blown. The official report was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction. The incident was classified as a protocol failure, a tragic consequence of operating in a compromised digital environment. As a result, I was being reassigned for my own safety. It was a lie. I was being exiled, sent to a desk job at Joint Base Andrews, Maryland, where I could be silenced and forgotten. That night in my temporary quarters, I stood before a small mirror. I looked at the reflection staring back, a tired woman, her face pale with shock, a fresh bandage from a minor injury during the evacuation stark against her uniform. But her eyes weren't defeated. They were burning. The simmering anger I had suppressed for a lifetime had finally erupted, forged in the crucible of betrayal and digital fire into a single, cold, hard purpose. Have you ever been pushed so far, betrayed so deeply that all the fear inside you burns away and leaves nothing but pure, unyielding resolve? That was me in that moment. I placed my hand over my heart, over the uniform they had tried to turn into a shroud, and I whispered the words of my oath, the sacred promise I had made to my country, but now remade for myself. I, Sarah Mitchell, will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. My voice was a low, steady whisper, but it was the most powerful sound in the world. And I knew with absolute certainty that the enemy was no longer a distant threat in a foreign land. The enemy was domestic. The enemy shared my blood. The real war had just begun. My exile at Joint Base Andrews, Maryland, was intended to be a quiet professional death. They gave me a gray, soulless cubicle in a sprawling administrative building, a mind-numbing mountain of incident reports, and expected me to fade into the background noise of bureaucracy. They underestimated me. I didn't see a prison. I saw a war room. I didn't waste a second on self-pity. The fire of my oath burned too bright for that. My first and only call was to Viper. Using a secure encrypted line, I contacted him at his post in Germany. "Viper, it's Sarah," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I need your help. It's off the books and dangerous." I told him everything. The phone call from my father and brother, their demand to falsify the security report, my refusal, and the sophisticated cyber attack that followed just 3 days later. I laid it all out, the cold, ugly facts of betrayal. A long, heavy silence stretched across the line, and for a terrifying moment I feared I'd asked too much, that I dragged my only friend into a mess too vast and treacherous. Then he spoke, and I could hear steel in his tone. "Sarah," he said, and I could hear the anger building. "I don't care if it's a 4-star general or the president himself. No one gets to do that to an American soldier. No one." He paused, then added, "Send me everything you have. We're going to burn their system to the ground." His loyalty was the only light in the darkness. It was all I needed. We began our war in the shadows. I started with the grammar of the system, just as my old Georgetown professor had taught. "Liars always leave grammatical errors in their narrative," he used to say. "Flawed structure, misused protocol, unnatural rhythm. Truth has natural syntax. Deception doesn't." My battlefield was hundreds of pages of Phoenix Defense Systems performance reports. On the surface, they were perfect, too perfect. The language was a sterile collection of corporate jargon and vague, positive-sounding terms. Operational efficacy, robust performance, minor logistical variances, all designed to say nothing while sounding impressive. I cross-referenced every report with maintenance logs, finding dozens of tiny, concealed grammatical errors, equipment failures logged as user error, damaged components listed as scheduled for routine replacement. Patterns emerged. Phoenix consistently underreported critical vulnerabilities in their security protocols. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Viper launched his own assault. He began a deep dive into archived communication servers from the Qatar mission. As he suspected, The official record was a lie. Log files from the night of the cyber attack were flagged as corrupted due to system error. It was a clumsy, obvious attempt at cover-up. But Viper was a digital ghost, a genius who moved through firewalls and data logs with an artist's grace. He told me later that a cover-up like that was like trying to hide a hole in snow. You can't. The absence of data itself is data. He didn't look at the corrupted files. He looked at the space around them. He analyzed the server's backup caches and residual data fragments. And there, in the digital dust, he found it. Metadata fragments pointing to an unauthorized access port opened and closed just hours before the attack. The port traced back to a private encrypted server, a server owned by Phoenix Defense Solutions. We worked relentlessly for 2 weeks, fueled by black coffee and shared cold fury. We barely slept, communicating through encrypted chats at all hours. Then at 3 a.m. my phone buzzed. It was Viper. His voice was a mixture of exhilaration and pure rage. "I got it, Sarah. I got the bastards." He sent me a single heavily encrypted audio file. My heart pounded as I decrypted it. It was a restored recording from the Phoenix server. It was a phone call between the CEO of Phoenix and my brother, Colonel David Mitchell. The call took place just 6 hours before the cyber attack hit our systems. I pressed play and my brother's voice filled the silence of my small room. "My father has done his part," David was saying, his voice smooth and confident. "Pressure's on. Now it's your turn. Just make sure the incident is convincing enough to shut her up permanently." The CEO murmured something about risk. "It's not a risk," David cut in coldly. "It's a solution. Digital attacks leave less evidence than kinetic ones. Plus, she'll be too busy trying to restore systems to investigate properly." My breath caught. The world tilted on its axis. But there was more. Viper had found another file. It was a digital copy of a contract addendum approving a massive no-oversight budget increase for Phoenix Defense Solutions. The authorization was dated the day after the cyber attack. The digital signature at the bottom was undeniable. General Robert Mitchell. I leaned back in my chair, the evidence glowing on my screen, the phone call, the signature. It was the truth, cold, sharp, and brutal. It was confirmation of a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. My professor was right. They had left their grammatical errors, and I had found every single one. The weapon was loaded. With the evidence in my possession, the weapon was loaded. But a weapon is useless without the right battlefield. Going through standard channels, filing a report with the Inspector General would bury the truth under months, possibly years of bureaucratic red tape. My father and his powerful friends would suffocate it in its cradle. I needed a different kind of strategy. I needed a stage. So I made my final move. I compiled the most damning pieces of evidence, the audio file of David's call, my father's digital signature, network logs from Viper's investigation, into a single heavily encrypted summary. I didn't send it to investigators. I sent it directly to the one man I knew valued honor above allegiance, General Hayes. The file was attached to a message with a single line. "General, the honor of the Air Force is at risk. For 3 agonizing days, nothing but silence. I started to fear I had miscalculated, that I had overplayed my hand. Then a short, formal order arrived in my inbox. Captain Mitchell, you are required to attend the annual technology demonstration at Edwards Air Force Base. Special focus on drone warfare innovations. No explanation, none needed. I understood immediately. General Hayes wasn't just acknowledging my message, he was setting the stage. The ceremony, the event where my father was scheduled to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award, wasn't going to be a coronation. It was going to be a tribunal, and I was to be the star witness. I returned to the same auditorium that had been the theater of my greatest humiliation. The air was thick with the same sense of pomp and circumstance, the same sea of dark blue uniforms and polished brass, but this time I felt no anxiety. The girl who wanted to be invisible was gone. In her place was a woman about to become unforgettable. I walked to my assigned seat, back straight, gaze level. I felt a profound, chilling calm. I was the quiet eye of the hurricane I had created. From my seat, I could see them in the VIP section. My father looking regal and proud, accepting handshakes and congratulations. My brother David beside him, beaming, soaking in the reflected glory. They were utterly oblivious, confident in their power, never imagining that the pawn they had sacrificed was about to checkmate the kings. The ceremony began. Speeches were made. Awards were given. Finally, the moment came. The announcer called my father's name, listing his legendary accomplishments. He walked to the stage to thunderous standing ovation. After he accepted his award, General Hayes, as the highest-ranking officer present, stepped to the podium to give closing remarks. He began by praising my father's long career. Then his tone shifted. "Before we conclude," he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "there is one more matter of honor to address, an issue of security and integrity that touches us all." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. General Hayes gestured to the massive presentation screen behind him. There was a recent security breach in Qatar that resulted in the compromise of a sensitive mission and the endangerment of a U.S. Air Force captain. On the screen, a network diagram appeared. One Viper had painstakingly reconstructed. It showed a clear, undeniable, unauthorized access port originating from the Phoenix defense server. This breach was deliberately covered up. Hayes continued, his voice like ice. The screen changed, displaying the contract addendum, and the cover-up was authorized to protect a lucrative contract. He zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the page, General Robert Mitchell. A collective gasp swept the room. My father's face, projected onto the screen by a nearby camera, turned a ghastly shade of white. His confident smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure shock. But Hayes wasn't finished. He gave a subtle nod to the tech booth. And now the reason for the cover-up. Sound filled the auditorium. The audio file. It was my brother's voice, cold and clear, echoing through the silent hall. "My father has done his part. Now it's your turn. Just make sure the incident is convincing enough to shut her up permanently." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing void. Every single person in that room, 1,000 pairs of eyes, turned away from the screen and stared directly at my father and brother, who were frozen in their seats like statues in a nightmare. I stood up from my seat and walked to the stage just as I had been instructed. I stood beside General Hayes and looked down at my family. I saw my brother David, his face contorted in panic, trying to stand, to speak, to form a denial that would never come. 2 uniformed military police officers materialized beside him as if from thin air, their presence quiet, professional, and final. Then I looked at my father. I met his eyes across the stage, and for the first time in 32 years, I didn't see anger. I didn't see disappointment or disdain. I saw fear, raw, naked terror of a king who had been dethroned, of a powerful man who had been utterly and completely exposed. General Hayes didn't say another word. He simply turned to me and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of profound respect, a silent acknowledgement of a battle fought and won. He had given me justice. I returned his nod, a silent thank you. Then I turned and walked away from the podium, my steps steady and sure. I walked past the chaos, past the shocked whispers, past the ruins of House Mitchell. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The storm was finally over. The aftermath of the war was quiet. After the trials, the dishonorable discharges, and the prison sentences, a profound silence fell over House Mitchell. My father's name was stripped from buildings, portraits removed from halls of honor. His legacy, the one he had sacrificed his daughter for, had turned to dust. I felt no joy in it, only a deep sense of peace and stillness. The heavy chains of expectation and disappointment that had bound me had finally rusted through and fallen away. I was free. I chose to leave the high-stakes world of field operations. On General Hayes's recommendation, I accepted a teaching position at the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base, California. It was a world of rolling golden hills and earnest young pilots, a world far from the sharp edges of Washington, D.C. and the ghosts of Qatar. I was tasked with designing and leading a new program, advanced drone operations and autonomous systems. My own small corner of the Air Force, built on a foundation of innovation and precision. On my first day, as I stepped up to my new office, I saw a small, polished brass nameplate on the door. It didn't have my name. It simply read The Reaper Room. It was a quiet gift from Viper. I stood there for a long moment, a slow, genuine smile spreading across my face for the first time in years. My legacy would not be a code name whispered in the shadows of intelligence operations. It would be a classroom, a place to pass on what I had learned, to ensure that no young officer would ever have to feel that intelligence was a weakness, or that a weapon that didn't fire bullets was useless. In my first class, I didn't start with technical specifications or flight protocols. I started with a story, a modified, anonymous version of a mission that nearly failed because of a single misunderstood cultural gesture in cyber warfare. I taught them how to listen not just to data streams, but to patterns. I taught them how to look at an enemy's digital behavior and see the story they weren't telling. After class, a young female specialist, sharp and bright-eyed, stayed behind. "Captain," she said, her voice full of quiet reverence. "Thank you. No one ever told us that precision could be a tactic." In that moment, seeing the spark of understanding in her eyes, I knew I had found my true purpose. I wasn't just winning my own war. I was now arming a new generation of pilots with weapons of understanding, weapons that could build bridges instead of just destroying enemies. My healing process began there in the quiet hills of California, nurtured by the words of Maya Angelou that my mother used to read to me. "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." A year later, a small package arrived at my office. No return address, but I recognized the elegant looping handwriting of my aunt. Inside was no letter, no explanation, just a single faded photograph. It was me at 12 years old, sitting on the floor of our old house at Fort Bragg, completely absorbed in the aviation engineering book my mother had given me. My face was a mask of pure concentration and joy. I turned the photo over. My aunt had written a short note on the back. "Your father asked me to send this to you. He didn't say anything else, only that this is how he wants to remember you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't absolution, but it was an acknowledgement, a quiet admission sent through a third party that the little girl with the books had, in her own way, won. That her path, the one he had scorned and ridiculed, had held strength he never understood. I took a thumbtack and pinned the photograph to the corkboard in my office right next to the brass plaque reading, "The Reaper Room." Two legacies side by side. I looked at the face of that little girl, and for the first time I didn't feel the sting of loneliness. I felt only pride. I had been healed not by forgiving them, but by finally completely forgiving myself for ever believing I wasn't worthy. Months passed. My program grew. Students from across the Air Force came to study advanced drone tactics. I developed new training protocols, wrote manuals used throughout NATO, and became a recognized expert in the field. But most importantly, I found peace. One evening, as I was reviewing student progress reports in my office, an email arrived from Viper. After all these years, he was still checking in, still the partnership that had saved both my career and my sanity. "Sarah," he wrote, "heard about your program. Proud of you, partner. You built something beautiful from the ashes. That's what a phoenix does, right? Rises from the fire stronger than before." He'd attached a video file. Curious, I opened it. It was footage from a recent NATO exercise, a drone swarm operation using tactics I had developed, flawlessly executed by students I had trained. A complex multi-target scenario requiring split-second coordination and perfect timing. Mission success, 0 casualties, textbook precision. In the corner of the screen, small text overlay, Operation Phoenix Rising Advanced Drone Tactics by Captain S. Mitchell. I leaned back in my chair, watching the young pilots I had mentored demonstrate everything I had taught them. Technical excellence combined with strategic thinking, power tempered by wisdom. This was the legacy I had built, not through revenge or bitterness, but through dedication to the next generation, through choosing to lift others rather than tear down enemies. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I recognized, a current student struggling with complex maneuvers. "Captain Mitchell," the voice was nervous. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but I have a question about autonomous targeting protocols." "No problem, Lieutenant," I replied, pulling up my training materials. "Let's work through this together." As I spent the next hour helping the young officer understand the nuances of drone coordination, I realized something profound had shifted. The angry, isolated girl who once cried over a stained acceptance letter was gone forever. In her place, an instructor, a mentor, a builder of futures. I had found an altitude I never knew existed, not measured in feet above the ground, but in lives touched, minds opened, potentials unlocked. Outside my window, desert stars were brilliant in the clear California sky. The same stars that had witnessed my childhood pain, family betrayal, and professional struggles. But also the same stars that witnessed this moment. A woman who had chosen forgiveness over vengeance, building over destroying, hope over bitterness. I finished the call with my student, saved my work, and prepared to leave the office. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to pass on knowledge earned through pain and transformed into wisdom. As I turned off the lights and locked the door, I paused once more at the brass nameplate. The Reaper Room. Death had many meanings. Sometimes it meant an end, but sometimes, as in the case of the Phoenix, it meant transformation. The death of an old self so a new one could rise. I had died many times on this journey. The disappointed daughter died. The isolated specialist died. The angry victim died. From the ashes, a teacher was born, a mentor, a builder of dreams. True power, I finally understood, was not in the ability to destroy enemies. True power was in the ability to create allies. I stepped into the California night, stars overhead like a benediction, ready for whatever new altitude tomorrow might bring.